Good morning. Hello. Welcome. My name is Charles Esser, and I'm the Secretary General of E.DSO, European Distribution System Operators. And I'd like to welcome you to today's 7th edition of the Cybersecurity Forum. It's sponsored by and organized by not only us, E.DSO, but also by the European Energy Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the European Network for Cybersecurity, and the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA. So welcome to all from those organizations, but to all of you who've come today. Thank you, and as well, welcome to our speakers and panelists. I will just be introducing people today, but I would like to just quickly say that today's edition has the theme of From Theory to Practice, How do we get it right, and how do we get it right on time? We'll have an opening session after the keynote speech on challenges for a cybersecure European energy system and grids. And then we'll have a review of we'll have our first panel. What are the pitfalls and gaps in upcoming legislation? So it'll be a very regulation and legislation-focused panel. Then we'll have a main lessons learned from ENISA's exercise in June. And then finally, we'll have a panel on skills. Are we prepared for the cybersecurity sector? And skills, indeed, is a theme that goes across much of the energy sector and much of the tech sector. So I think that'll be a very pertinent panel for all of us. With that, I would like to call our keynote speaker, José Ferrari Carreto, who is here in the front, and who is the CEO of E.DSO Portugal, which is the DSO in Portugal, and also he is the vice chair of E.DSO and also the chair of our Technology and Knowledge Sharing Committee. So he's universally known as Ferrari because everyone in the DSO sector, if you say Ferrari, they will all know who you mean. So with that, let's give a warm welcome to José Ferrari Carreto, who will give our opening keynote address. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you in a very important event. And I like just to highlight two things there in the screen. One is that is the edition number 7 of this event, which means that we are being consistent on discussing this important issue. And I think that is something that deserves mention. And the second thing is that this is an initiative that reunites different associations, different entities, and I believe that in order to discuss this very important topic, we need to work in network and to work reuniting different perspectives, different backgrounds, and different experiences, and the different entities that are here together are reuniting those experiences and that knowledge. And I'd like also to highlight this. This is a very important topic nowadays, and I believe that it's in the confluence of two very important trends that we have right now in the context where we operate. I'd say that the first trend is digitalization, and the second trend is electrification. And I believe that those two trends reunited somehow give us the perspective about how cybersecurity is important. Regarding electrification, we know that nowadays more and more energy and in particular electricity will be important for the economic development for the different societies. There is nowadays a huge effort in order to increase the intensity of electrification in Europe and in other geographies, using more and more electricity. We know all what is being done regarding this, and this means that grids will be even more important. Nowadays, we know that grids are important, namely to have this meeting as we speak, but as we have more electric mobility, as we have more heat pumps, as we have more decarbonization in the economy, So grids will be more important, and knowing that they are critical nowadays, I'll say that they'll be more and more critical. So this is the first trend where cybersecurity is important, because if those infrastructures are critical and if they become even more critical, of course, cyber is even more important. The other trend is digitalization, and we know that nowadays, when you look to grids, they are more digital. The digital intensity increased a lot in the recent years and will increase more in the future. We know that smart meters nowadays play a very important role in grids. We know that more and more all supply points are served by a smart meter. This happens in a lot of countries, and in the countries where smart meters are not yet installed, we know that in 5-10 years, all supply points will have smart meters. This is very important for the electrification. It's important for having more efficient networks. It's important to give the right information to the market and to consumers in order to modify their behavior, and in order to have consumers and different agents to take decisions based on data. And we know that in order to have more efficient networks, digital is very important, as we have a lot of IoT devices, as we have sensors in our networks, as we have automatic devices in our networks in order to automatize the networks. So digital is present nowadays, but in 5 to 10 years, it will be even more important than today. When you look to the investment that we'll have in networks in the coming 10 years or so, we know that digital is responsible for 30 to 40% of that investment, which means that digital will be pervasive in our networks, and they'll be pretty much based on digital. If we reunite those two trends, we understand how cyber is so important. So on one hand, the networks will be even more critical than they are today. And on the other hand, as we have digital, they will be more vulnerable to cyber attacks. So if we put those two things together, we understand how it's important to have this kind of discussions, how we should be focused on cybersecurity, and how it's important that all stakeholders are very aware of the risks we are running, and that we need to create very clear, stable frameworks in order to deal with this threat. Again, I believe that meetings like these are very, very, very important for those discussions. I believe a lot that to share experiences, to share backgrounds, to have different perspectives, even from the geographical point of view. I believe that it's important to have people from Europe, from North America, South America, Asia. The threats are the same. They have different flavors, and we need to leverage on those flavors and on the different experiences we have. It's important to have a very large network in order to detect threats in advance. It's very important to learn from each other when we have those attacks, or even the attempts to have those attacks. And we need to create, to reinforce, and to have live this network of good guys that fight against the bad guys that are always trying to reach our networks and to harm our networks. So this is very important. As it is very important to have, as I mentioned, a stable framework and a defined framework, and here it's important to mention the very important role of legislators in this area, in order to create a framework, in order to create rules that should be followed by the different players in this area. And for those rules, I'd say that is very, very important to reach a balance between rules that are effective, rules that assure us that we are safer, but also rules that are implementable, rules that are not bureaucratic, and rules that we can put in place in the right measure, that they combat and that they reassure us that we are able to fight this threat. So there is a balance to reach, as everything in life. I would say that one of the main topics in life is to reach the balance. And here, when we are talking about this framework, it's very important to reach the balance between something that is effective, but it is efficient at the same time. So I'm sure that all the legislators are aware of this balance, and I wish them that they find the right balance to allow us to proceed in this area. And another remark, just to mention that it's important also to have the right funding to implement such rules. We know, and here when we talk about grids, we know that in future we have a lot of challenges related with investment. So there are a lot of studies mention this, that we need to increase the investment in grids in order to cope with the huge challenges we have related with the energy transition. As I've said, part of that investment is related with digital, but part of that investment needs to be related with cybersecurity inside digital. So in order to be able to protect the grids, the different networks we have in our different geographies, we need to have funds to implement that. We need, as we know, when you talk about digital, nowadays, when we protect our systems, we need to implement specific tools in order to do so. Those tools cost money, and we need to assure that we have the right funding in order to cope with that challenge. Again, here, I believe that the different stakeholders, regulators, governments, parliaments in different countries need to be aware that this is an area where we can't save. Of course, that we should be efficient, but being efficient doesn't mean that we do not do the right things. And we need to implement those tools in order to prevent attacks, in order to protect the grids. Those tools cost money, and this means that these investments should be considered when we define the amount of money we are allocating to networks. And this requires also a long-term perspective, which is something that we need when we talk about networks. And one risk we run sometimes in some geographies is that the different stakeholders may have a short-term perspective on the funding of the networks, just counting on the next year and the year after the next. And when we are talking about digital, and when we are talking about those cybersecurity threats and how to protect them, we need to project our needs for the next 5 to 10 years and not to the next couple of years, which means that the investments that we are implementing right now, they should protect the networks for the next 5, 10 years, and this should be considered as a long-term investment, as a preemptive investment, and can't follow the usual rule of an investment that should be paid and used in the next couple of years. So I believe that the different regulators are aware of that, but it's good to recall that consideration, that we need to protect our networks in a very long-term perspective. This costs money. We have the obligation, I would say that even the moral obligation, when we manage networks, to run them in a very efficient way, which we do, but we also have this obligation of protecting the networks, and to do that we need to allocate funds to that endeavor. And of course, that is important that the different stakeholders are aware of that, and to acknowledge that at the end, this is not a responsibility just of DSOs or TSOs. It's a collective responsibility of all stakeholders that are involved in this process. And I mean, not just the DSOs, the TSOs, the governments, the regulators, the different national parliaments, the European Parliament, and the Commission. So this is a responsibility where I believe that everybody should be involved and should assume their responsibilities. A final word, just to say that no one can fight this war alone. This is a threat, a real and material threat. During the forum, we'll have a specific topic about a specific attack that occurred. I believe that any one of us have a story to tell about cybersecurity, even an attack or an attack attempt or a real situation. I believe that all of us have their own story. I have my own. And we know that this is material. This is not science fiction. This happens. This may happen. As we speak, we know that there are a lot of guys trying to reach our networks. And luckily, we have good guys on our side trying to overcome those risks. But we alone can't fight this war. And this is why it's so important to have these kind of forums. We need to reunite efforts. We need to share experiences. We need to share information. We need to know when someone of us was attacked, or we need to know when an attack attempt occurred in order to protect ourselves. We need to share. We need to overcome, to be, let's say, embarrassed about an attack. It's no shame. So we need to tell others that we were attacked or there was an attack attempt. There is no shame to share that. And this is the only way to proceed on this field and to succeed and to be prepared for the next threat we'll find. So I wish you a good forum. I wish you that all your operations are safe, and count on us, on the different entities that are here, in order to help you, to help us if something wrong happens. Thanks a lot.
Very much. Thank you. So now I'd like to call to the stage. Well, first I'd like to say, unfortunately, we could not have the head of unit for cybersecurity from DG Connect join us today. However, we do have the head of unit for energy security and safety director for DG Ener, Monica Sigri, who will join us now and will give a opening session presentation, and then we'll be able to take a few questions from the audience. So please, the floor is yours.
Let me just first set up the height of the microphone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be here. I am slightly new to the cybersecurity world, not to energy security though. But I find it quite important that we are present here. It's a pity that our colleague from DG Connect couldn't be here. The both of us and our teams work very closely together because, as was already mentioned, cyber is an area of cooperation, and you cannot remain in silos. Energy cannot do without, or the energy system cannot do without the help of the technical knowledge or the information knowledge that you find somewhere else. And to be honest, sometimes you cannot do either without, for example, defense colleagues, in case the things get a bit hotter than we would like. So today I would like to focus on three main points, and I think I will be slightly repeating what our main speaker actually mentioned, but then let me then reconfirm that the importance of those points. So one of them is the need to implement what we have now, implement it efficiently and effectively, especially in where we are now in the energy market, in particular in the electricity market, where we have slightly more rules than somewhere else. My second point is the importance of cooperation among all stakeholders, and this is where I reinforce the message that has been already done before. And the third point is, as was mentioned, finding a balance between our needs for cybersecurity and the costs and the benefits that may come with it. So that's always a point when it comes to energy security. You have to balance what the risks, the implications are, and how much you are willing to invest in actually addressing those. So let me start with with how we get to this point and just give a bit of a context. As was mentioned already, the energy system and the economy is on a path of decarbonization. That for the energy system itself means more renewables, more electrification, more complex systems, and in order to make sure more need for flexibility, and in order to make sure that this actually happens, there is a lot of need for more digital elements overall in the system, be it because renewable electricity generation has loads of digital elements, but also when it comes to empowering the end consumer and allowing it to participate in the overall flexibility of the system. Smart meters, its direct connection to or impact on what it can do. Also demand response, connecting cars to the energy system. So I think we are really looking at a very complex system in the longer term. So in order to make allow this system to be more dynamic, flexible, and more digital, obviously the surface of attack will increase. And because of that, we have to make sure that this bigger surface is protected a bit more. I think the last 2 years showed us that for Europe, but also for other countries, energy infrastructure is one of the critical assets. So we have to be sure that we do protect this critical infrastructure. It is not only physical attacks that can impact the infrastructure, but also from the cyber side. So there is a significantly increasing focus on protecting energy infrastructure and because of that also cybersecurity. In the energy area, we already have certain regulations or policy actions where we do look at cybersecurity. One of them is for example, the regulation that is focusing on the electricity market, the so-called risk preparedness regulation. There we already have activities and measures that ensure that the risks that the electricity system faces are assessed. And depending on their seriousness, the authorities or the member states need to come up with measures to counter attack them. Here, cybersecurity is already present, so member states should be able to, they do have the policy context to actually deal with it. But as the world is changing so fast, we also saw the need to have more specific measures when it comes to cybersecurity. Also considering that the electricity market is very much interconnected. There is no one member state separately dealing with its own cybersecurity issues or any energy security issues, because any event can pass on and have a cascading effect on other countries or on other systems. And the way we do it is with the so-called network codes, and here the network code on cybersecurity on cross-border electricity flows is obviously coming from this need to address the cross-border impacts of any cyber risks. Now, in order to make sure that these great rules and policy ideas are actually implemented, there is a need for a lot of cooperation Already the design of these rules requires a lot of cooperation and the involvement of all stakeholders and the experts, because us behind our desks as policy officers, we are very smart, but let's be honest, the cyber world and the technical world, digital world is much more complex than for us to be able to come up with something which is meaningful. So, as was already mentioned, rules need to be implementable, they need to be reasonable, and they have to make sense. And this is why we cannot design anything or implement anything without the involvement of all of you who are sitting around this table. And for that, we also need exchange of information. That was also mentioned. We need to trust each other on the elements or on the topics that are important, because with that, it will be very difficult to implement something in an efficient way. Anything which is not efficient will just increase the cost on all of us and will keep the risks at high level. Now, and that takes me a bit to the risks and the benefits, the cost-benefit of measures and the risks. Risk assessments are an integral part of all the legislation that we have in the area of energy security, cybersecurity. We do have a wind power action plan where we are looking at the risks that are associated to that supply chain. For that, we need to understand the technical background of all those elements. Why do we need to understand the risks? Because we need to understand what their impact is, what their likelihood is, and come up with measures that address those, but in an efficient way, so not to overdo it, and focus on the ones that are indeed very important. In the Net Zero Industrial Act, we also have now cyber-related measures or activities, and one of them is when it comes to procurement, there need to be criteria based on which we select a supplier or a piece of infrastructure, and there a risk assessment on whether from a cybersecurity perspective, it is something that is relatively safe. This is something that needs to be considered. But as I mentioned, all this requires a lot of collaboration between all the stakeholders. So it's not really just the design, but also in the implementation. And the risk assessments can serve as a very good basis to assess what does make sense, what is cost effective, as opposed to just throwing out money out the window and focusing on things which may be addressed in a cheaper way. And this is where exchange of information, experiences, good practices can come in handy, because if something works in one member state, in one authority, in one company, can as well be applied to other parts of the system. And with that, I would probably like to just conclude. So I hope that I managed to get all those 3 important messages across for you. So just to finish it off, so cybersecurity, protection of critical energy infrastructure is important. It will get more and more important in a world where we are digitalizing heavily, electrifying heavily, and trying to transit away from fossil fuel-based an economy. And for that, we do need your involvement, your active participation, your trust towards each other, and your knowledge and expertise from the different parts of the ecosystem. We always like some words to repeat. And with that, I would like to just thank the invitation, and then I would wish a good continuation of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so now we have time for a few questions. I would ask if people would say their name and affiliation, and also try to come to a question fairly quickly. Do we have any questions? There's one. Luis?
Luís, Luís Cunha from Erredes in Portugal. Just a question for you. Thank you very much for the speech. Just to understand, how do you see the implementation of these rules that you mentioned at the European level down to the member state level? So you mentioned that is possible to replicate to a certain extent what one member state does to other member states. But how do you foresee the involvement of the European Commission and the way to push this forward? Thank you.
Works. The implementation of the network codes as rules has already started. There was a kickoff meeting with the participation of all stakeholders. So and with the support of the Commission, the implementation as a responsibility is falling now on the authorities, the stakeholders, and there is a timeline to actually do that. So there is a governance for the implementation which exists. There are the deadlines for the different steps. The relevant cybersecurity authorities need to be identified in each and every member state. So that is already an important step. And the Commission, our colleagues, we are happy to follow up and follow all this implementation process. So whenever there is a hiccup and we can intervene, we are very happy to support that work going forward. However, the implementation is needed to be done on the ground. We also have set up a subgroup of an expert group with the participation of different stakeholder associations when it comes to cyber. So that also is one of the fora that we would like to use to exchange information and get feedback from the ground, so that when there are difficulties, that we can also help support. And it is also a very good place to exchange those good practices among stakeholders.
Thank you. Other questions? No other questions. I see one over here to my right.
Hi, good morning. Casper Hophouse from E3G. I think I was wondering if you could maybe build a little bit more on this sort of governance question, and then also looking across the vectors a little bit. So not just so the challenges, specific challenges to the distribution level systems, which we, I think, understand, but trying to sort of gauge how this interacts with maybe with the electrification and the decarbonisation, and how maybe there needs to be a centralised governance structure in place, and whether DG ENA is, or structures on the European level can be able to provide that in a sort of neutral way, going beyond the sort of things you're suggesting, because it feels a bit empty for now, if that's possible to say.
I'll try to answer. So when it comes to energy security, we already have a sectoral legislation. If we look at for electricity, so we do have a risk preparedness regulation. For gas, we have a gas security of supply regulation. Also for oil, we have security of supply regulations. We also have a regulation on decarbonized gases and hydrogen. So there is a framework of rules that work. And under the energy security regulations, for each of these sectors, we do have coordination groups where exchange of information is assured, as well as those are the ones that follow up on the implementation of any of these pieces of legislation. Those also serve to exchange on information, but also if there is a crisis situation, or if there are any developments or events or incidents in any of the countries, these are actually provided to this group, and it will be discussed then what the measures are that certain member states would take, and what the impact would be that on other member states, or whether other member states can support. That can also be valid for cybersecurity. However, on cybersecurity, as it is not strictly just energy related. We do have other structures. I mean, I think we have ENISA in the room. So there are other structures that follow up on different incidents, and depending on the nature of it and the need to discuss and share that information, obviously then other stakeholders would be reached. The subgroup on cybersecurity that I mentioned, it is more focused on the implementation in relation to the network codes that we have now on electricity, as well as the overall planning and cooperation that is led by ENSOE and E.DSO to implement the network codes with the involvement of all the relevant stakeholders and experts is one of the main vehicles to get this very specific network code to fly.
Can you hear me? No. Yes, yes. Okay, great. Just to add a couple of comments here to help a bit on the discussion. I was listening to you and I was thinking a bit about the strengths and weaknesses we have in this process. And if I could list them, well, at least to contribute to have a list of strengths and weaknesses, I would say that on the strength side, I'll list the following. First, all stakeholders are aware of the threat. I think that this is good. So we are aware of this. We acknowledge that a threat exists, and I think that this is the first step to have success on this area. First, second, we are used to deal with threats and with challenges at European level. And third, we have the right stakeholders in order to take care of that. So we have the Commission, we have the European Parliament. There are a lot of entities that have, let's say, focus on cyber and security and so on. So I'll say that those are the good things about this, and I'll put them on the side of the strengths. On the weaknesses, I would say that we have a very fragmented environment in this area. So we have in Europe big DSOs, but we have also a lot of very small DSOs. And there are different levels of preparedness regarding this kind of threats. And we need to be aware of that. So we have, let's say, I'd say that like 10 big DSOs, but we have thousands or large hundreds of small DSOs. And this can be a weakness or at least a point of attention. Second thing is that when we are talking about cyber, anyone, even being very, very small, can be the most fragile element of a chain. And this is a weakness. If we consider that not all the companies that are operating in Europe have the same level of sophistication and the funds and the experience and the resources in order to deal with this, but in a world where everything is interconnected, as Monica said, so if something happens to a very small company or operation in a specific country, this can have like a chain effect all around. So first. Second, we do not have a lot of standardization in the electricity field. I worked for telecommunications during like 20 years, and I was here with my good friend that we met there during some years in telecommunications sector. And when we compare electricity to telecommunications, the level of standardization is completely different, which means that we have very different solutions all around Europe when we are talking about DSOs and TSOs. And as in the telecommunication sector, with a huge level of standardization, is easier to introduce the right rules through standards that could be active all around Europe. In the energy sector, and particularly in the electricity sector, this can be a bit more difficult. So I'd say that this is the the second weakness that I would like to mention. And I would like also to mention one thing that I didn't mention in my first intervention, which is artificial intelligence. That is an additional threat on top of the threat that you are living in. I'll say that this can be also on the weakness side or in the strength side, depending on the use we have for the artificial intelligence. But I will think that it will be more a threat that, more a weakness for the operations we have in Europe than a strength, due to the level of sophistication of some operations. So we know that artificial intelligence can be used as a defensive tool or as a tool to attack. And looking to the European space, I would say that, and pardon to use this language, but I would say that the bad guys are more keen to use artificial intelligence to attack than the good guys are to use artificial intelligence to defend. So just a contribution to understand on the strengths and weaknesses we have and trying to give some additional information to your question.
Thank you very much, and indeed, thank you for that impressive on-the-spot analysis, which I think we all benefited from. At this point, I think we will move to our next speaker, so thank you very much to our two initial speakers. We can give them another round of applause, and we'll move to our next speaker. And now I'd like to call Andreas Sfakinakis to the stage. He is a SANS F4 578 instructor and a member of ENISA's working group on cyber threat landscapes, and he'll give a testimonial.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy being here today in this forum. It's my first time, so I'm looking forward to have interactions with you. And I think Mr. Careto gave very nicely, the importance of electric grid. So I'll try now to give a little bit of perspective on the threat side of things, what's happening from a threat perspective. If we see a little bit of background, I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst. I'm a professional doing cyber threat intelligence for the last 10 to 12 years. I've been working for the retail sector, financial sector, and the last years I'm also a SANS instructor on a cyber threat intelligence course, so I'm working mostly with practitioners to enhance their capabilities on how they track cyber threats. So today we're going to be speaking mostly about a brief update, also conscious of time, a brief update on the energy sector threat landscape. So we're going to give a brief update. And second, we're not going to spend time on the attack, on an actual attack, but more like an incident that happened, the CrowdStrike outage, and the lessons that we can get, as a community out of this incident, which is quite interesting. First, let's deep dive on the energy sector threat update, and let's see some key updates and how the threat landscape looks like. The last 1 or 2 years, what we have observed, we have seen threat actors, most of the time like nation state backed, and the CTI community, the cyber threat intelligence community, has observed more cyber activity and more sophistication from these threat actors, which is quite interesting. Yeah? So we see threat actors. If you were a threat actor and you have impact on the electric grid, most likely the crown jewel for you would be the transmission segment. So we see that these threat actors are targeting especially the transmission segment. And you might be wondering why not the power generation or the distribution. The power generation, these are plants that have specific processes with people working on this, have safety instrumentation systems, while the distribution segment has quite a lot of substations, maybe controlled by different distribution utilities, companies, and maybe the threat actors have to target quite a lot of organizations in order to target multiple substations. What is interesting for this one is think about the adversary perspective, how sophisticated can be an attack, and what is the impact they could have in terms of they have to balance this kind of requirements. What we saw is geopolitical crises and tensions, they drive quite a lot on activity, cyber activity on the electric grid. We have seen, for example, happening quite a lot. So the Russia and Ukraine crisis and conflict, they drive quite a lot of Russia-linked groups targeting the electric sector, the electric grid in Ukraine. We have seen in 2022 one of the most prolific groups like Sandworm targeting the electric grid of Ukraine 2 times in April 2022 and October 2022, which is quite interesting. We have seen other Russian-linked groups having powerful offensive frameworks for targeting operational technology. And of course, we have seen the tensions between China and Taiwan. We have seen cyber activity from specific groups that are linked to China, targeting specifically the electric sector. I don't know if I've ever heard Volt Typhoon, one of these groups that are targeting the electric sector most of the times for getting information and stealing quite a lot of information from electric companies. It's quite interesting that apart from these tensions, we also see hacktivists targeting more and more the operational technology, and since sometimes, or most of the times, electric grid is of national security, we have seen hacktivists targeting more and more critical infrastructure, and I think this is a trend that we have to note. The difficult with hacktivism is sometimes you don't know if it's a real hacktivism that is ideologically motivated, or there is some kind of state-backed or intelligence services behind this kind of activity. So it's always with a question mark if this activity is coming from a hacktivist group or is supported by intelligence group or a state. What is also interesting, we see again more and more, I think for every organization out there, number one threat should be ransomware, and we see more and more these days. I think Dragos reports a 50% increase in ransomware incidents targeting the industrial sector. So it's more and more, and we have seen some recent ransomware attacks, especially in some Italian energy companies. And what is also interesting, some new technologies, for example, the distributed energy resources like solar parks and wind farms. They introduce new attack vectors for the threat actors, which is quite interesting. I mean, actors that may be targeting power plants now might be targeting these DERs, which is quite interesting because we have two challenges with DERs, like how we manage vulnerabilities in remote places and how we can have updates for this. And the second one, apart from the vulnerability side of things, it's how somebody an adversary can coordinate an attack against them and have a cascading effect on the electric grid. So it's quite interesting to think about how the attackers can really target these DERs, like solar parks and the wind turbines and the wind farms, and they have a cascading effect. Think about disrupting these ones, and 30% less energy goes to the electric grid. How the electric grid would react. So think about these new attack vectors that are coming with these technologies. And of course, smart substations, smart meters, all of them, they provide opportunities for the threat actors. They don't wait for the opportunities, they create the opportunities in order to exploit this kind of new attack surface. This was a very, very brief update on what we see on the energy threat landscape, and especially on the electric sector. We see an uptick in general on targeting the last 2 years, and this also was followed by, this was following especially some kind of tensions and crisis on the geopolitical side of things. Now, if we pivot on something that's really interesting, it was one of the biggest events of 2024. It was the CrowdStrike outage, and it was quite interesting to my mind because it was probably the largest outage in history. I mean, if you read the headlines by that day, this outage was historic in scale. And if we want to speak about impact, it was most likely tens of billions of dollars based on this outage. But first things first, so let's see a timeline of how things happened. So CrowdStrike is one of the biggest cybersecurity vendors worldwide. I think CrowdStrike more or less protects more than 500 companies from Fortune 1000 companies, which is quite a big number. So they have agents at the endpoints, and they also communicate with the cloud in order to get up-to-date intelligence about the threats. CrowdStrike believes in this kind of everybody from their sensors to get intelligence, and then intelligence is pushed to all the endpoints that they have customers. So at some point on 17th of July, one of these configuration files, this new threat detection updates. So it's critical to understand it's not like an update of the endpoint agent, of the software that's running in the laptops or the servers or the systems. It's actually the rules, the detection logic for detecting the adversaries. And this kind of update happens 10 to 12 times per day. So what was interesting, this configuration file was sent to the sensors, to all the endpoints, the software. And what happened was actually there was a mismatch between the parameters that the software was expecting, and because they cannot translate what was the action for one of the additional parameters, it was a blue screen of death for more like 8.5 million Windows systems out there. So think about somebody gets an update and 8.5 million Windows systems get blue screen of death. They couldn't operate. CrowdStrike realized within 76, let's say 1 hour and a half, that this update was bad, so they revoked the update. So in this kind of race condition, like 1 hour and a half, all the systems that download these files was blue screen of death, were disrupted. It was quite interesting because there was a huge effort for recovery, and quite a lot of times the recovery was manual by all the organizations. Think about organizations that have 100K workstations. How do you recover from such a disruption? It was quite interesting. If you see, some organizations reported that on 20th of July, like 22 hours after the update, 90% of the impacted systems have been restored online, which is quite interesting. Apart from the manual work that was done, there was also quite a lot of organizations, Microsoft included, that had some scripting that was done. Then on 22nd of July, CrowdStrike submitted in SEC in the US the Form 8K for major incidents that impact the organization. On 25th of July was the preliminary analysis, and CrowdStrike reported that 10 days after the initial malformed configuration file, 99% of the impacted systems were restored. And think about the Pareto principle, how long it took to restore 90% of the impacted systems and how long 99%. It was quite interesting. On 6th of August, the official root cause analysis report, because everybody was asking for more information from CrowdStrike, so on 6th of August, CrowdStrike provided the root cause analysis report, and we all knew about this kind of malicious configuration files. And last week, CrowdStrike testified in front of a congressional committee in the US. I think that this timeline is still going on. What is quite interesting is we have lawsuits from the shareholders of CrowdStrike because they thought that the company didn't inform them well that all the updates were tested before disseminated to the customers. And of course, it was Delta Airlines. The organization had a huge impact, like $500 million, because of the flights that were grounded because of this disruption. So this is a little timeline about the incidents. What we can learn about this one, especially on the critical infrastructure side of things. I mean, we need to have a robust software deployment strategy or patch management strategy, whatever. When we want to deploy new features, new updates, new software or patches, especially in ICS environments, we need to have a way to do it in a very structured way, using staged updates, deployment rings, and make sure that we understand what we're trying to update. In this case, while people that used the CrowdStrike, they knew that they were like 2 versions behind the current version of the software. They didn't know that there is another update channel that on a daily and in real time, they update the threat detection definitions. It was quite interesting. From operational resilience, when this happened, when CrowdStrike updates were sent to different organizations, it was quite interesting because quite a lot of organizations, they had to have all this kind of operational resilience and recover and go back the organization into running mode again. So what we learned from business continuity and from major incident response, we have to be there, especially in ICS environments. We need to, spend time before to save time later. So think about all the hours that were lost in order to recover back all this kind of BitLocker keys in a manual effort. And this has implications because maybe you have people to do manual work, maybe you need to have people in different countries in order to make sure that you can restore systems back in a timely fashion and not lose productivity, i.e. money, especially in the ICS. Usually, ICS and OT is where companies make money, so we don't want to lose money as well. Then a big thing, it's about supply chain risks. I would challenge you guys, this is a big supply chain incident. And CrowdStrike has a huge God mode in every system. Do you know in which crown jewels of yours you have provided access to suppliers or access to software that has God mode, like administrator privilege in your systems or not? The thing is that you might be following the right processes, the right procedures, but do your suppliers follow the same processes? Because you depend on them as well. And this also brings concerns about liability. So when this happens, who is liable on this one? And also insurance concerns. Finally, I think Ms. Monica mentioned about the balance between speed and system reliability for cybersecurity. So how many do we want? How quick do we want to write threat detections and have cybersecurity measures? And how critical is this one against our stability and the reliability of the systems? CrowdStrike, after the fact, of course, in the root cause analysis report, they mentioned that they're going to have more testing, more validation. They have a third party to review everything that they do, that the processes are the right ones. And what is quite interesting is the fact that I see in other critical infrastructure sectors like the healthcare or the automobile, there is the regulation if a software developer is pushing software to critical infrastructure, they have to do also functional testing, not testing of the new features, which is quite interesting. Maybe there's some learnings in this space as well. I added this slide with what-if scenarios. So what if the fix has taken longer? Like it took them 76 minutes to revoke the malicious configuration file. What if they haven't realized in a timely way, and this is for two days online? What if the event was not from the supplier, but from a malicious actor or a malicious insider? It's quite interesting. And what would be the recovery costs if this event has lasted more days or more weeks? So this is actually what-if scenarios for tabletop exercise and thinking about these ones. So we speak about briefly deep information about the energy sector threat landscape, about the CrowdStrike IT outage, and what we can learn out of what happened in CrowdStrike. And finally, I always, in my last slide, have the SANS 5 critical controls about incident response planning, defensive architecture, visibility and monitoring of your operational technology, secure remote access, and finally, risk-based vulnerability management. And thank you very much. I would be happy to receive any questions from your side.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And indeed, we do have time, I think, before the coffee break for just a few questions. So I see one right there, right away, so we'll go ahead. Please introduce yourself and give your question.
Working? No.
Yes.
Now, perfect. Hi, I'm Annika Wägenbauer from the Institute for Security and Safety. And I have a bit of an ironical question, because I mean, you have on the one hand, to put that positively, a risk appetite that companies are taking, right? And on the other hand, you want to do a holistic BCM to secure your supply chain. So how do you do that? And how do you argue for that as a business case, right? Because securing your supply chain entirely would mean a very high invest.
Yeah.
And then does that make sense?
Yeah, very good question. And I think we have we have one panel session only for this one today. I'll tell you what I know from my biased perspective on the IT networks that I worked the last 3 years. So what we try to do is work with the third party we have in our organizations that I work. We have a dedicated team on third-party risk. So what we do as a CTI team, as a threat team, cyber threat team, we work very closely with them and try to identify the crown jewels and identify which organizations have access, or the MSPs of this world, or the integrators of this world. So we try to prioritize them, and also we try to prioritize what are the critical suppliers. What we try to do with them, from a threat perspective, we have the tools that will scan the internet, the deep and dark web of this world, and we try to identify breaches or whatever bad practices they follow. So we have, through the third-party risk team, we go and close the gap. Hey, we have seen this one. Maybe you do a mistake on this one. Maybe you don't follow best practices. Can you give us a little bit of assurance on what you do? We get all the learnings, of course, and we try, if not in the current contract, in the next contract that we have, to make sure that everything is written down. So think about the supplier. If it's not written in the contract quite a lot of times, they will not do it because they're not forced to do it, unless there is a regulation, or that they have to follow and comply, or there is a contract in between. In CrowdStrike, for example, CrowdStrike, in the contract, they have liability only on the fees paid for the service. So if a company said, hey, I had business disruption because of you, okay, you paid that much for my service, get your money back, long story short. So it's interesting. It's not only one team. It's a whole program for managing third-party risks. And of course, for example, I work for an organization that we have, I don't know how many thousand suppliers. You cannot monitor all of them. Prioritization is key. And identifying crown jewels that suppliers have access, and all the critical suppliers for you with a framework that you have to come up with. Okay? Thank you. Hope answered the question. Thank you.
I think, unless we have one really, okay, but it has to be very quick because we're getting into our coffee break. So one really quick question over there to my left. That will be the last one.
Hello.
Yeah.
So yes, good morning, everyone. So I'm Ayush from Cybersercurity, and I'm new to the energy market. Okay, and my question is that do we have a dedicated security intelligence group within the energy sector? Because I have been member of SANS and CERT teams, where I get a lot of notifications and awareness about different threats that are arising. But what about if we have something that is dedicated to energy industry, so that I do not get flooded with something that is not of my concern?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, the last years we have seen so more and more sharing groups. Because why? We see activity touching our logs in OT, in operational technology, and we see a need. I mean, cybersecurity, it's not one single organization's game. We need to share. Remember, sharing is caring. We have seen quite a lot. I have seen personally, and again, it's my biased view, and maybe people can, add whatever they know about sharing groups. But in the EE-ISACs that we have been participating, we do have quite a lot of interesting intelligence of exchange of intelligence about specific threats targeting the energy sector. On the formal side of things, public-private partnerships. We work very closely with governmental entities to make sure that we get information, that they have sources that we don't have sometimes. And at the third level, we go also the commercial sector or informal groups in order to get intelligence that we need, that's critical for the energy sector. So thinking about it in multiple levels, EE-ISACs, governments, commercial vendors, and informal connection with people that have the same concern just like you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll now, let's give a round of applause to Andreas, and then We'll go to the coffee break, which will be where the first coffee break was. So you just go out here and up the stairs and go to your left. So thank you.
Thank you.